A lot of people out there care that much to come out and see.
He's sitting with a girl, young, laughing, that smile working exactly the way it always worked on every person who ever got close enough to see it in real life. She is looking at him the way millions of girls looked at him across 5 decades.
I don't know who you are now. That broke my heart. I can't even tell you the effect it had on me. That I realized there was only one way for me to go in the rest of my life.
Like he is the most magnetic person in any room he has ever walked into. And he probably was. Cut to him singing. That voice, warm and precise and completely effortless in the way that only genuinely talented people can make something difficult look. The crowd is losing their minds. Thousands of them, screaming, some of them fainting, some of them crying, all of them completely certain that this man on that stage is the person they think he is. Cut to him laughing with a friend. Relaxed, easy, the kind of comfort that comes from being at the absolute center of everything for so long that the center starts to feel like the only place you have ever existed. He looks like a man who has everything. He looks like a man who will always have everything. Now I need you to look at a different image. A hospital bed. November 2017. The same man. 67 years old. Liver failing. Kidneys failing. His body shutting down from a specific damage that decades of alcohol abuse produces in a human body when nobody intervenes early enough and nothing changes.
David Cassidy died of multiple organ failure. Although he suffered a well-publicized battle with alcohol, which can cause organ damage, David claimed to be sober in the years leading up to his death.
And in that hospital room, in one of the final coherent moments of his life, his daughter came to see him. The daughter he had not been present for. The daughter who grew up knowing David Cassidy the way most people knew David Cassidy. From a distance, through an image, through a smile on a magazine cover. And he looked at her and said 7 words that I cannot get out of my head, no matter how many times I have read them. I don't know who you are now. 7 words. To his own daughter. In his final days. That is where the story ends. And the distance between that laughing young man sitting with a girl and the man who said those 7 words in a hospital room. That distance is the story. And nobody has told it completely. Until now. We were all told the same story about David Cassidy. The teen idol, the heartthrob, the voice that made an entire generation feel something they had never felt before. I think I love you. You know it. Your mother knows it. Your grandmother knows it. That song is embedded in the cultural memory of an entire era. And the smile attached to it was the most carefully managed image in the entertainment industry for the better part of a decade. But I went through every court document, every financial filing, every interview that his publicists tried to reframe before it reached print. And what I found underneath that smile is not a complicated man with understandable flaws. It is a system, a deliberate calculated system that identified a talented 20-year-old, extracted everything it could from him, gave him almost none of what it owed him, and then handed him the tools to destroy himself when it was finished. By the end of this video, you will never hear, "I think I love you" the same way again. Let's go back to where it actually starts. Not the version his publicists approved. The real one. 1970. David Bruce Cassidy is 20 years old. He has just been cast as Keith Partridge in the Partridge Family. And within 12 months, he is the most photographed young man on the planet. Not one of the most. The most. Stadiums selling out in hours across America. Fans fainting at concerts in London and Tokyo and Sydney. I Think I Love You sells over 5 million copies. He is earning money that most people in 1970 America could not have conceptualized. And here is the first thing the controlled narrative built around David Cassidy needed you to never look at too closely. He hated Keith Partridge. Not privately uncomfortable with the image. Not artistically restless in a way his team could manage. Actively suffocating inside a character that was making other people extraordinarily wealthy while slowly erasing who David Cassidy actually was. He said it in interviews. His team reframed it as artistic ambition, healthy creative evolution, a star growing into his potential. What it actually was is a young man screaming inside a box that the industry had built around him and locked from the outside. And here's the thing that I had to go through multiple legal filings to confirm. The contracts he signed as a teenager in 1970. The contracts that gave the machine access to his image, his music, his likeness, his time, his identity. Those contracts gave him almost none of the residual income from one of the most successful television properties of the decade. Almost none. He later tried to sue Sony Music over the Partridge Family royalties he was owed. That lawsuit dragged on for years, legal fees mounting, settlements that did not come close to what the accounting should have shown. And while the lawsuit was running, the IRS came in with a separate claim, hundreds of thousands in unpaid taxes, all of it simultaneously, all of it eating what little remained of the wealth that the machine had generated using his face and his voice and his youth. And the machine said nothing, because the machine never says anything. It just moves on to the next one. But here's the thing that connects all of this to that hospital room. The thing that nobody covering the financial collapse story ever connected clearly. David Cassidy's father was Jack Cassidy, also an actor, also a man who struggled with alcohol for most of his adult life, also largely absent from David's childhood, a father who was there in the industry sense, who understood what his son was walking into, and who was not there in the way that actually matters, in the daily consistent present way. The pattern that would eventually destroy David Cassidy was not created by David Cassidy. It was inherited from a father who was not equipped to interrupt it, and then handed directly to an industry that was not interested in interrupting it either. Because a David Cassidy who was psychologically healthy and financially secure and surrounded by people who actually protected his interests was worth less to the machine than a David Cassidy who needed the machine, who needed the next tour, who needed the next appearance fee, who needed the next opportunity to be Keith Partridge one more time for an audience that remembered what that had felt like. We are at the 5-minute mark, and this is where I need you to stay completely focused. Because what comes next is not the story of a man who made bad choices. It is the story of what those choices actually cost. And the person they cost most was not David Cassidy. By the 1980s, the Partridge Family was a decade in the past. The machine had moved on completely, and David Cassidy was spending money that was no longer being replaced at the rate it was leaving. Cars, properties, a lifestyle that had been built during years when the income justified every decision. And then he made the investment that I had to verify multiple times before I would say it on camera. He put a significant portion of his remaining wealth into a horse breeding farm, not a diversified portfolio, not real estate in a market that made sense for the late 1980s. A horse breeding farm that generated no meaningful return, that drained his finances at exactly the moment he had no incoming revenue stream capable of replacing what was leaving. By 1995, the number was impossible to argue with. Chapter 11 bankruptcy, debts of nearly $1 million. The man who had sold out stadiums on 3 continents. The voice that 5 million people had paid to own on vinyl. Filing for bankruptcy in a Florida courthouse, with almost nothing remaining from an era that should have secured him for life. And here's what made me stop completely when I found it. He went back to being Keith Partridge. Not because he wanted to. He had spent 20 years trying to escape that character. He went back because the bills required it. Nostalgia tours, fan conventions, appearances at events built entirely around the memory of a smile he had grown to hate. That specific smile. Back on stage. Because there was nothing else that paid enough. And the drinking that had started quietly in the late 1970s was not quiet anymore. It was showing up in his performances, in his reliability, in the specific way that people who had known him for years started looking at him with a concern they could not quite name in public. 2010. Broward County, Florida. Police observe a vehicle swerving. They pull it over. The driver fails the field sobriety test, slurring words, struggling to maintain balance. The breathalyzer reads nearly twice the legal limit. The driver is David Cassidy. The mugshot went everywhere. And I mean everywhere. The face that had been on the cover of Tiger Beat and Rolling Stone and every teenage magazine in America for a decade. Now on a police department website. Disheveled. Aged past what 60 years should look like. staring at the camera with the expression of a man who knows exactly what this image means and cannot stop it from meaning it. That photograph became the new controlled narrative. Fallen star, former heartthrob, cautionary tale for the entertainment journalism industry to reference whenever it needed convenient example. But here is what that narrative always left out. The mugshot was the symptom. The disease was what the industry had done to him, starting in 1970 with contracts he was too young to evaluate, and ending with a bankruptcy filing that should never have been possible given what his work had generated for the people around him. The mugshot was easy to photograph. The contracts were not. And then there's Katie. And this is the part of this story that I find most difficult to tell. Not because it is complicated, because it is simple. And simple tragedies are always the hardest ones. Katie Cassidy, born November 25, 1986, David's daughter. He was not present for her childhood. He was married to someone else when she was born. He provided financial support, but was largely absent from the actual daily experience of being her father. She grew up knowing David Cassidy the way the world knew David Cassidy, through an image, through a television screen, from a distance that felt permanent. She was raised by her mother and her stepfather. When she grew up and built her own successful acting career in Arrow and Supernatural and Gossip Girl, they began to reconnect, carefully, with the specific carefulness of two people navigating a relationship that should have been foundational and had never been given the chance. And then, in 2014, David gave an interview and said on record that he had never met Katie's fiancée, that he did not know her. The comment hit Katie in public, in front of everyone who followed both of them. She responded on social media with 2 words. Wow. Speechless. The internet speculated about dementia, about cognitive decline, about whether the David Cassidy making those statements was the same David Cassidy who had told interviewers for years that his relationship with his daughter was something he was working on. And then 2017, Dr. Phil, David Cassidy sitting in a chair that he looked too tired to be sitting in, clearly struggling, clearly confused at moments, and then a clarity that cut through everything else. His voice breaking, his eyes wet, saying the thing that the controlled narrative of his later career had never allowed him to say this clearly before. I've never had a relationship with her, and that's been the biggest heartbreak of my life. A man who was absent from his daughter's childhood, saying on national television that not having a relationship with her was the biggest heartbreak of his life. The tragedy of that statement is not that it is dishonest. The tragedy is that it is completely honest, and that the distance between what he felt and what he was capable of being was a distance that had been building since 1970, since the contracts, since the machine took what it needed and left what it didn't, since a 20-year-old signed his name on documents that shaped the rest of his life in ways he would spend decades trying to understand and never fully recover from. November 2017. The hospital, his body failing, his daughter not in the room. Sources said she had privately made peace with their relationship before his death. She did not visit. I am not going to tell you that was wrong. I do not know what it cost her to make that decision. What I know is what she did after. She posted a black and white photograph of the two of them, and wrote that words could not express the solace she found in knowing he was at peace. And then she got his signature tattooed on her wrist, permanently, his handwriting on her skin, a tribute to the father she loved, and never fully had. November 21st, 2017. David Cassidy died at 67 years old. Liver failure, kidney failure. The physical bill for decades of what the industry started and addiction continued arriving all at once. In his final coherent interviews, he said the thing that all the nostalgia tours and fan conventions and managed public appearances had been constructed to prevent him from saying plainly, I was given everything, and I threw it all away. He believed that. He genuinely believed that what happened to him was his own doing. And that belief is the final thing the machine gave him, the conviction that the fault was entirely his, that the contracts were not the problem, that the royalties he never received were not the problem, that the father who modeled the pattern he inherited was not part of the problem, just him, just his choices, just the throwing away of everything he had been given. That belief is the most efficient thing the controlled narrative ever produced. A man who should have been asking serious questions about a system that extracted his value and left him with almost none of it, instead asking only what was wrong with himself. That is not accountability. That is what the machine looks like when it wins completely. Here is what I want you to carry with you. The girl sitting next to him at the beginning of this story. The audience screaming in that stadium. The friend laughing beside him. None of them knew what was underneath the smile. None of them knew about the contracts, or the royalties, or the horse farm, or the daughter who would one day get his handwriting tattooed on her wrist because it was the closest she could get to the father she never fully had. They just knew the smile, and the machine made sure that was all they needed to know, because the smile was the product, and the man behind it was the cost of producing it. David Cassidy paid that cost every day for 47 years. His daughter paid it too, in a different currency, over the same amount of time. And the machine that collected the payment is not in a museum. It is not a historical artifact from the entertainment industry of the 1970s. It is running right now, with better contracts, more efficient extraction, and a new generation of 20-year-olds signing their names on documents they do not fully understand, with people around them who understand those documents very well. David Cassidy is not the cautionary tale. He is the proof of concept. The scariest part. He is not the only one. He never was. And the next person sitting in that hospital room, saying, "I don't know who you are," to someone they should have known their entire life, is already inside the machine, right now, smiling for the camera, not knowing yet what the smile is going to cost.